So part of the reason that the structural deficit is now so high is that in the years leading up to the financial crisis, the UK experienced not only unsustainable housing and financial services booms, but also a public spending boom greater than in any other developed country. And, as it has turned out, this boom was an unsustainable one as well. Now, this conclusion is not one with easy implications. Public spending is now approaching 50% of national income, and will be far more than that in some regions. And the difficulties that will be experienced by any government trying to reduce spending will perhaps prove to be one of democracy's sternest tests. For it is a sad truth that we all want something for nothing. We'd all be happy receiving a service we don't have to pay for, and we'd all urge that cuts or tax rises fall somewhere else. And we certainly won't want to vote to make ourselves worse off. There's also a major coordination problem. If every lobby and interest group in the UK accepted some cuts to their area, it would be much quicker and easier to solve the deficit problem we have. But the incentive for each interest group in isolation is to resist cuts in their area. Why should you be the first to accept sacrifices for your members or your constituency if no one else is doing the same? And if there are lots of cuts elsewhere, then there's no need for extra cuts on you. So we still, even now, hear groups regularly arguing for more spending on their favoured area. But this lack of coordination, of course, makes reducing the deficit all the more difficult. Now, if all this sounds like doom and gloom, it needn't be. People may not want to vote people may not want to allow themselves to be made worse off, but neither do they want their children paying high levels of debt interest for years to come. Reducing borrowing in the short term will help to safeguard public spending in the long term, and there are positive examples to back up this point. One of the best examples of a rapid and durable fiscal consolidation is Canada. The story's been told before, but I think it's worth briefly telling it again. Canada's budget deficit in the early 1990s was threatening to get out of control. In 1992, it reached a high of over 9% of GDP. Just 5 years later, the country was recording a budget surplus, and it continued to run surpluses almost every year up to the current global economic crisis. Now, over that 5-year period, the deficit was closed almost exclusively by spending restraint, which supported a strong rebound in economic growth. Spending fell by 9 percentage points of GDP over that period, while the tax burden hardly shifted. Now, the Canadians achieved this by setting up a process called Programme Review that required departments to identify a long list of programmes or activities to cut or transfer out of central government. The result of Programme Review was that federal departmental budgets were reduced on average by 20% over 4 years. Now, those cuts meant that despite other areas of government spending rising, between 1993 and 1997, total federal, provincial and local government spending was roughly frozen in cash terms, which of course represents a sizable reduction after inflation. Now, in the UK, with debt interest payments going up, unemployment benefit spending also rising, departments are going to have to think about making savings of a similar order of magnitude to those the Canadians managed to achieve. Now, this is undoubtedly tough, but look at how successful Canada is now. No one is arguing today that Canadian public services are woefully underfunded, as was arguably true of the UK in the late 1990s. Canada is a positive example that should give encouragement to people in government over here. So if it's clear that public spending has to fall, then what's the best way to go about it? I don't think there's any one right answer. Part of the solution will be about improving efficiency, and I'm sure that many good ideas on that front will come out of today's conference. Indeed, the Institute of Directors will shortly be publishing a paper by our chairman today, Corin Taylor, showing how £25 billion a year could be saved through integrated procurement and a greater use of shared services and outsourcing throughout the public sector. Efficiency is often, however, difficult to achieve in practice. We need to find efficiencies and avoid cutting services as much as possible, but it is going to be difficult to achieve. A couple of years in, the National Audit Office found that up to 3/4 of the savings identified by the government's previous efficiency drive, the Gershon programme, had not been achieved. And of course there's a similar risk with the current operational efficiency programme, although I'm sure that many lessons will have been learnt about what does and what doesn't work. Another route the government's taking is selling off assets. The trouble with this approach is that it may well be the wrong time to sell assets, so they might be going off too cheaply. In addition, asset sales only deliver one-off savings instead of the annual savings that are needed, so it can only be a small part of any overall package. There's also been much debate in recent months about choices between reforming public services to get more value for money and cutting items of public expenditure. I think in reality there isn't really a choice between reforms and cuts, for the simple reason that reforms don't save money straight away. They take time to deliver the benefits, while the deficit does need to be tackled as quickly as possible. To give one example that's topical at the moment, we can all agree that many people on benefits currently face punitive marginal tax and benefit withdrawal rates if they make the first tentative steps back into work. So we can agree that the benefit system needs to be reformed to encourage people to return to the labour market. But reducing those high withdrawal rates is going to cost money in the short term, even if it saves money in the long term through a higher employment rate. So on the one hand, there does need to be a serious discussion about the strategic direction of the UK and the reforms needed to ensure that the country can compete, prosper and deliver effectively for its people in a world marked by an ageing population and the rise of countries such as China. But on the other hand, it is going to be necessary to identify areas of government spending that are not delivering value for money or are not a priority, and these items will have to be cut or got rid of altogether. This will have an unavoidable impact, but the challenge will be for the public sector to come out of this leaner and more effective. To just give one of many examples, one of the tasks of the local education authorities, which are now folded into the children's services departments of many local authorities, one of their tasks is to monitor the national curriculum. But that's surely what Ofsted is there to do. Ending this duplication will not harm the quality of education that our children receive, but ending many such duplications has the potential to save a considerable sum of money. Now, I'll just give a few final thoughts to conclude. First, I don't think there's enough publicly available data on either the detail of public expenditure or how that expenditure is linked to outputs and outcomes. To improve the quality of public debate and of policy making, it is essential that we have a more comprehensive basis to evaluate different public expenditure programmes. The Treasury should publish its coins database in full, and local authorities that have started to release full details of their spending, such as Windsor and Maidenhead and Mid-Sussex, should be applauded. I think second point is that increases in productivity in the public sector would allow more to be done with less, and they could potentially release the equivalent of billions of pounds of resources. For every 1% increase in the productivity of the 300 billion or so of government consumption spending, the equivalent of 3 billion of resources is released. Now, over the last decade, the Office for National Statistics has repeatedly found evidence of falls in public sector productivity, as the big increases in spending were not translated into commensurate increases in output. But that started to change in the last year or so, and a new era of tighter expenditure may well bring the best out of public services. If productivity can be improved, then spending cuts will not translate into equivalent cuts in services. Imagine if we could achieve a revolution in shared services, for example. And finally, I think it's vital that whichever party wins the next election is straight with the British people about the scale of the crisis and what will be done about it. I think the lesson of Canada is that you've got to get people on side for what you're going to do. But ultimately, I think we should be optimistic about the ability of the British people to get behind a government that is doing the right thing. Thank you.